Tonight, I would like to bring you some Area 51 stories, whether you have been in there yourself, or whether you want to be. Maybe this will shed some light on the stories you've heard over the years. And with that said, whether you're sitting around a campfire, laying in bed, or on the night shift, let my voice soothe your nightmares. So, by this point, everyone is no doubt well aware of the Area 51 memes and all of the hubbub surrounding them. Apparently, over 1 million people are set to storm the perimeter on September 20th of this year. Should be interesting, but let's be honest for a second, I doubt it will happen. And even if it did, even if by some ridiculous miracle they managed to overwhelm the most powerful military on Earth and infiltrate a top-secret base, I don't think they would be exactly thrilled with the results. I'll just come right out and say it, I guess. Area 51 is a red herring. It's a distraction, and it pretty much always has been. Nothing out there but sand, reclusive scientists, and some crusty-ass lake at this point. I mean, think about it. If Area 51 is one of the most top-secret and covert black sites in the world, then why does everyone know about it? How secret can a secret be if everyone knows the secret? For God's sakes, even Obama acknowledged its existence a while back. That's the whole point of it. They want you distracted, so you don't look for the others. But why take my word for it? Who am I anyways? Just some pleb on the internet that decided to cash in on a trend for some clout, and perhaps a bit of that sweet, sweet karma, right? Well, yes, but actually no. That may be who I am now, but I was once a person of particular interest to the United States government. Most people knew me as Mr. Blue, not my real name, but it's easier to pronounce. I used to be a pilot, did that for many years and loved every second of it. I tell ya, there's nothing quite like soaring to the skies and breaking the sound barrier for the first time. You might crap your pants a little, but it's all part of the experience, really. Now, unfortunately, the type of work I did was above top secret, and for all of our safeties, I cannot go into any further detail on what I actually did, or who I actually worked for. One day, I was out on a classified reconnaissance mission in a certain area where I should not have been. I'll apologize here for the vague details of certain things, but you have to understand, the things I'm about to tell you are beyond top secret. They would kill me 10 times over for uttering a word of it. So, here's to hoping that doesn't happen. Anyways, the mission was going as planned, when suddenly my instruments started to go berserk on my dash. Air pressure inside the cabin just plummeted, and the speed of fuel consumption gauges looked like they were playing ping pong with each other. Everything began to rattle like crazy, and my alarms erupted into a symphony of irritation. Next thing I know, I see this bright light soar past me at an ungodly speed, and shockwave. The shockwave it produced was so violent that it shredded the hull of my craft. In a split second, I went from casually flying along to suddenly regaining consciousness as I plummeted headfirst towards the ground at terminal velocity. I managed to pull my chute before I splattered, but as I touched down, I almost wish I hadn't. There I was, met by a waiting entourage of at least 24 men in winter camo suits and masks. They all pointed their weapons at me and screamed in a language which I recognized as English. I tried my best to calm down and appear unthreatening, but that didn't stop them from wrecking me into a pair of handcuffs and hauling me into one of the APCs. They began to drive away, and the real severity of the situation hit me. I was not going to be saved. The people I worked for had never said it, but it was always well known that if ever you were captured, then you were pretty much on your own. With that in mind, I had no real incentive to keep my mouth shut once they started interrogating me. It may seem cowardly, but I was not about to be brutally tortured for a former ally which would never come to bail me out. Yeah, the government says they don't torture people, but trust me, when they really want to know something, there's no tactic too extreme, and they really wanted to know something. So, I told them about who I worked for, what my mission was, where I grew up, and everything else. It was all fabricated, but they took the bait regardless, thanks to the severe distrust of the Russians at the time. They were actually pretty cool after that. I mean, they wouldn't let me leave their custody, but that was better than being dead, or at least it was at first. They transported me away from my initial interrogation place, into a secure facility somewhere nearby. I was blindfolded the whole time, but from the rumbling of multiple vehicles, sounds of doors sliding open multiple times, and the distinct feeling of my stomach dropping, I could tell they had taken me somewhere deep underground. Soon after that, I stepped off the elevator and they removed my blindfold. Their leader was a guy with a stern face, thick gray beard, and eyes that looked etched from concrete. He wore a black suit, with some symbol upon his heart pocket that I didn't even recognize. He stepped in front of everyone and outstretched his arms while staring me in the eye. "Welcome to your new home." An ever so slight grin slithered onto his face as he said it. I glanced down the dismal gray hallways, which seemed to stretch out further than I could see in multiple directions. They led me down the hall on the right, past dozens of locked corridors and rooms before ushering me into a cell. My handcuffs were removed soon after, and the door slid shut behind me. The same man that had welcomed me to the facility then approached the window and pushed the intercom button. "We appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Blue. I don't believe there is any reason why our time spent together has to be unfriendly. I apologize for all of this, but you must realize that this is a necessary precaution we must take. I hope you understand." I took a moment, then nodded back to him. "Wonderful. We will have dinner sent to you soon. If you require anything, then please notify one of the guards outside your quarters." And with that, he and his little entourage turned and strolled down the hallway. That was my very first night in the facility I eventually came to know as FEZ. I don't think it's the official name, but I heard several personnel at the base refer to it as the acronym over the years. I still didn't know exactly what it stands for. Forbidden Enclosed Ziggurat? Forsaken Evil Zoo? Forced Ejaculation Zeal? Fabulous Elf Zombies? The best I could really come up with was Fortified Experimental Zone. It makes the most sense too, all things considered. At first, it actually wasn't too bad. The staff was nice, they cooked great food, and there was plenty to see around the base. Although, every once in a while, I would hear the screams just barely echoing through the vents. They interviewed me probably 100 more times after that, and were especially interested in the craft, which I was piloting. The craft in question was one of our own top-secret technologies, but unfortunately it had been blown to smithereens by whatever that light was, so I couldn't tell them much about it. It took years of incarceration there, but eventually the staff came to trust me almost as much as they did their own comrades. We would laugh and joke with one another, and soon enough, we became what some might even consider to be friends. I became especially close with one of the scientists there named Kevin. Kevin was a smart guy, comical too, and explained quite a lot of things to me. He and I would spend hours talking on countless occasions. He was my only real glimpse into what was happening in the outside world. He'd bring in books and movies for us to enjoy together. He kept me updated on everything, and over the next 30 years, we developed a close friendship that I will always treasure. I must have displayed some kind of intellectual potential, because they eventually started asking for my input on various curiosities stationed throughout the base. They only did it because I had sworn them complete loyalty, and would never be allowed to leave the base anyways. But for me, it was just nice to feel included. The base itself was absolutely colossal. They always blindfolded me during transport to any location, but one time I caught a glimpse of the buttons in the elevator. There had to have been at least 50 of them on that panel. I remember the very first time they showed me one of the lockdown blocks. There were guards posted at every cell, and I heard some very strange noises emanating around me as we traversed the hallways. I thought for sure they were about to show me some horrendous beast of the depths of hell, and prepared myself accordingly as the howls of unseen things echoed throughout the halls. The lead scientist, Dr. Roosevelt, rolled back a two-way mirror curtain and my heart froze from anticipation. In the cell before us, there was nothing more than a human girl in a gray jumpsuit. She was young, maybe 5 years old or so, and there seemed to be nothing out of the ordinary about her. I looked to Dr. Roosevelt, and he flexed his cranial muscles before pressing a button. I heard the sound of gas seep into a room. A few tense seconds passed when the girl suddenly shrieked like a banshee. Her head tilted back, and I saw jagged needle-like teeth emerge from her mouth. Her jet-black eyes then lurched towards us, and she lunged at the window. She struck it hard, and fell back down to the ground, snarling and hissing like some ravenous jackal. Dr. Roosevelt then pressed the button again, cutting the gas and posing a question. "You ever seen anything like her, Mr. Blue?" All I could do was shake my head, slowly, as I watched the young demon child stalk about on the other side of the glass. They found her in the woods of White Horse with a freshly disemboweled man. She was eating him, and appeared unaffected by the sub-zero temperatures. I suddenly felt like vomiting, but I said nothing, only stared back at the unusually gruesome little girl. What the hell was she? Unfortunately, I never was told anything else about her, and I doubt the personnel knew much more anyways. They came to show me a lot of very strange things over the years. A giant brownish-orange haired primate that walked upright and seemed to respond to facial movements, a humanoid shape being that it was only detectable via infrared equipment, a golden chest that would instantly kill anything that touched it, a 10-foot-tall creature wrapped in vines that emitted bouts of radiation and blended into environments with perfect camouflage, a monstrous fish, at least 80 feet in length, frozen in nitrogen, various abhorrent creatures that I'm guessing were the result of some relentless genetic tampering. I had never seen anything like it. All of the monstrosities housed there, and the secrets buried in their possession. They also asked my advice on a certain paradoxical phenomenon that had plagued them as well. They told me that for decades there had been hundreds of unsolved cases of human disappearances that seemed to defy all explanation. Young children would be found on cliff edges that they could not have possibly reached, while old and frail people would be discovered dozens of miles away from where they had last been seen only a few hours later. Most of them would never be found at all, though. I could almost see the fear dripping from their eyes as they relayed case after case of recorded incidents, and it was clear, although not said, that they had no idea what the cause was. Unfortunately, neither did I, as it was the first I'd ever heard of the bizarre phenomenon. I told them honestly that I didn't believe my former allies were responsible, but I don't know if that made them feel better or worse. Throughout all my years there, I had always found one thing peculiar. After all the weird and terrifying things they showed to me, there was never any mention of extraterrestrials. That's what everyone thinks these black site facilities house after all. But nevertheless, they made no mention of it. That made me smile a bit when I thought about it, because they had no idea how close they were. The closest thing they had was this weird tentacle creature with a ringed set of teeth in its mouth. It looked almost like an eel, but possessed 4 iridescent green eyes and a ring around its head. It didn't live in water either, but instead slithered around on the ground in a very swift and unsettling motion. They said its DNA resembled nothing like anything they had ever found on Earth before, hence the reason they believed, but were not certain of its otherworldly origins. Kevin and I got talking back in his quarters one night, as the rest of the crew retired for the evening. He shared with me a bit of his brandy, and we were content to just chat as friends late into the night. He told me a lot about himself that he had never mentioned before. He showed me pictures of his wife and his son that had been taken from him. Kevin admitted his son had died in a car crash a couple years back, while his wife passed 2 years later of cancer. It broke my heart to hear that, and I felt sorrow for my dear friend of some 30 years. Kevin was in his early 50s, but you'd never even know it with the enthusiasm in his voice. It was during that conversation, Kevin ended up mentioning something I found particularly interesting. He told me that he believed that if alien species existed, they were advanced enough to traverse the galactic canopy and reach Earth. Then they would just obviously be quite intelligent. He said he didn't believe in any of the Hollywood depictions of doomsday aliens hell-bent on destroying humanity. He thought they'd be a lot more subtle than that. Think about it. You find something intelligent which represents almost no threat to you, and the first thing you do is try to kill it? Kevin asked skeptically, as I considered his words for myself. That would be just a waste. There's no species that fancies themselves as advanced beings would do something so brash. At least, I hope they wouldn't. He chuckled slightly and shot me a knowing look, mixed with a unique intrigue that almost glistened in his gray eyes. Even if they thought we were destroying our own planet or something, why would they care? There are trillions of other planets in the Milky Way alone. They could pick any of them if they wanted natural resources. I chuckled to myself, almost sensing where the conversation was headed. It's not the planets they're after, I replied. Kevin snapped, and pointed his finger at me as his face lit up. Exactly. They'd want to study us, learn how we operate, how we organize, and how we live. Kevin's hand motions turned eccentric, and I saw his access badge jostle around his neck. He took another sip of brandy and continued. They'd probably learn more about us than we even know about ourselves. I mean, granted, they have to be more intelligent. They could learn up close, understand how humans work. They'd have no need for bloodshed when they could simply inconspicuously integrate into human culture. They have no doubt mastered the art of altering their biology to disguise themselves as humans. I mean, that's nothing when compared to the tech they used to get here. He paused from his enthused monologue and wiped the steam off his glasses. I just sat back, content to let him continue, as I found it fascinating that he could know so much. Aliens. They're not warlords. They're poets, architects, authors, musicians, beings that wish to create. It is the ultimate calling for an entity so powerful. Kevin took a deep breath and revealed his own explanation. His speech had turned a bit slurred, and I could see his eyes floating lazily in their sockets. He then met my eyes in a look that he had never given me before. It was a look that seemed to shed all senses of formality, and posed a question which he had long since suspected the answer to. You're not really from Russia, are you? The sudden accusation caught me off guard, and I felt my stomach drop like a lead weight. I didn't say anything, and Kevin just scoffed. You had everyone fooled, and I mean, I was too, for the longest time. You had a subtle backstory, authentic sounding accent, all the alibis you gave us checked out. He paused and clasped his hands in front of him. You look so authentic too, but there was one thing you missed. One thing you just can't fake. He looked me deep in the eyes and fell silent. He didn't have to say it, for I already knew what he meant. The eyes are impossible to truly fake. That night your craft was shot down. What were you doing here? Kevin and I maintained a prolonged dialogue before I finally responded. Reconnaissance. For the first time in decades, I dropped the Russian accent, as it was clear there were no longer any reason to lie to my dear friend. And what did you see? Kevin stared into the very depths of my soul as he asked, and I spoke the truth. Beauty, poetry, creators, much like us. Kevin just stared at me for the longest time, as if he were weighing my soul in his mind. I wondered what he planned to do since he had found out, but I didn't ask. Kevin eventually smiled and rose to make his way to the cell door. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a black steel pistol with a long snout. I slowly met his gaze and he chuckled. Mr. Blue, do you wish to go home? I nodded after pausing to think for a moment. Kevin looked over his weapon and primed it for use. I hope your allies can forgive us. Without another word, he flashed his security badge, and then the locks on the door gave way. He motioned for me to rise and follow, and so I did. Kevin glanced back and forth down the hallway, but due to the late hour, there was no one around. He and I sprinted down the corridor and onwards to one of the security booths. He flashed his badge as I hid just out of sight. He entered the room, and I heard the noise of a brief scuffle before 2 bright flashes ended it. Kevin reemerged with wild eyes and beckoned me to follow. He and I dashed down the hallway and reached the massive main shaft elevator soon after. For the first time I entered without a blindfold, and Kevin punched the button to the top floor and the security code required to power it. Security systems will be down for a good half hour, but automated distress beacons have already been activated. That gives us about 8 minutes. Kevin dropped the clip from his pistol and popped in a fresh one. I saw spackles of blood on his glasses and cheek, and a frenzied look in his eye. Here, take this. He reached out his hand and held something which I had not seen in decades. The old radio from my craft. I took it, and he and I met eyes as the elevator door opened. It was back to running after that, but a few minutes of it, and we had reached an underground parking facility. Kevin quickly unlocked a nearby vehicle, and the 2 of us hopped in as he fired it up. The engine roared to life, and Kevin accelerated through the lot. A moment later, and we exited the underground facility, and I saw my first vision of the night sky in over 4 decades. There were men stationed at the perimeter gates and attempted to stop us, but Kevin didn't flinch. He crashed right through the wire fence on the perimeter, causing multiple lights to activate in our wake. I heard a siren blaring behind us, and the silhouettes of people dashing throughout the snow. There's a suit in the back. Put it on. I did as he requested without question, and fit the snug polyester garment over my body. It covered every square inch of my foot from the nape of my neck, and felt incredibly comfortable. There's a dial on your right side. You can use it to mask your body heat. They're not going to be after you. He tossed a map into my lap and continued barking instructions. You can contact your friends with that radio, right? His eyes flashed to me as he slid onto the main road and away from the compound. Yes, Kevin nodded. Make your way north. They won't be expecting that. There's a river up there about 30 miles away through the forest. Once you find it, head east until you find a small town. Ask the guy at the post office for Mr. White. He's a friend of mine who's agreed to help you. He'll take it from there. I tried to digest the flow of information as best as I could and remained confident. It had all just happened so suddenly. I stashed you some MREs in the bag. Should last you a good couple of weeks. Kevin then swerved around a corner and reoriented us into a new dark road. In the sudden influx of adrenaline, a sudden thought occurred to me. What happens to you? Kevin didn't seem to want to acknowledge the question. Forget about that. Just get back to your people. Behind us, a flurry of lights suddenly ascended into the night sky. The whirring sound of rotary blades then pierced the tranquil canopy of the blustery night. Crap, I had hoped I could get you a bit farther than this. He suddenly slammed on the brakes. My head lurched forward and the car spun back and forth along the icy road. Take this too. He handed his long-barreled pistol over, and I hesitantly took it. He and I then met eyes for one final time. This is where we say goodbye, Mr. Blue. Why? Why are you doing this for me? Kevin sighed, and I saw a certain sorrow swirl into his ironclad pupils. He stayed silent for a moment, and only when the sounds of approaching engines grew louder was he spurred to reply. You don't belong here. You don't belong in a cage. I don't know where you come from, but I want you to see the ones who love you again. His eyes began to water, and he jostled his neck before looking me in the eye one final time. I hope you don't think of us as captors or kidnappers. I hope you see us as you see yourself. I just hope you can understand. A single tear then rolled down his cheek. I put my hand on his shoulder. I always have, and I always will. Thank you, Kevin. I held out my hand and he grabbed it tight as we shared one final moment before I ventured into the blizzard. The journey from then on was long and arduous, with me spending weeks trudging through snow and frozen forests. Hounds, men, and machines pursued me for days, but somehow I was able to elude their efforts. The terrain was brutal, unrelenting, but eventually I managed to find the river which Kevin had mentioned. By that point, all my pursuers had long since gone silent. I followed the river and found the town, and soon after, the man known as Mr. White. He was a kind man, and gladly invited me into his house to avoid the agents. It is there that I have been ever since, awaiting my allies' arrival. They were stunned to hear from me again, but not as stunned as I was to find out the radio was still functional. They weren't entirely sure whether they could even trust me anymore, but I didn't leave them much of a choice when I threatened to go public and expose them to the world. They finally agreed, but admitted it would be months before they could reach me. I expected as much, and thankfully, Mr. White allowed me to stay with him and await their eventual arrival. I found out soon after that my dear friend Kevin, to whom I owe my freedom and life, had been found deceased. The authorities ruled it a suicide, gunshot wound to the back of the head, but obviously, I have my doubts about that. It truly broke me to learn of one of my true friends' demise, but I knew it was what he expected. I like to think that is why he chose to do it. And furthermore, it is the reason I am here posting this now. Kevin's legacy deserves to live on, and this is the only way I know how to do it. And with that, we have come full circle to this message you are reading right now. Area 51 is indeed a reuse. Kevin held a lot of power in his previous role, and he told me all about the operation. The real prize is the FEZ, my former prison, somewhere in eastern Alaska, buried beneath the snow with all sorts of abhorrent things in its clutches. If you are going to storm anywhere, that should be the place. Just remember to pack a coat. Kevin was a smart man, brilliant even. If you've managed to make it this far, then I'd like to think you are someone like him. Brave, curious, and with an almost innate sense of wonder that cannot be satisfied. It is my hope that Kevin's ideas will live on through you. My allies would never approve of this message, but I know now that they are wrong. Truth is something that all sentient beings should be allowed to perceive, despite how unpleasant it may be to hear. It was Kevin's belief that the beings he knows as aliens are already here, that instead of murdering humans as often portrayed in stories, they would blend in, take keen interest in human culture, society, and art, write books, poetry, and music in hopes of connecting to something truly extraordinary, something that reminds them of themselves. If Kevin is right, then maybe one day you'll even stumble upon such a story for yourself. Maybe you'll think it's nothing more than a work of fiction to entertain you for a while, but maybe the author of said theoretical story would seem like nothing more than your run-of-the-mill internet user. He probably wouldn't just come right out and say it, because that would be entirely too corny. He would probably just leave you in pieces and hope that you could understand the truth for yourself. Maybe you truly are like Kevin, drawn to mystery and prepared to entertain the fantastic. Maybe you'll just dismiss the implications of the words before you because you don't dare believe in something so outlandish. Because in the end, truth is not the problem, belief is. Maybe someone will understand who, or more importantly, what I really am. Maybe it will be you. Either way, I've been away for a very long time. It is time for me to go home. Thank you, Kevin. I will always uphold our agreement. So many people have seen the memes being posted about the Area 51 raid. Well, I thought it was all just memes, and was all jokes, and since I run a meme page for fun, I posted some of them. I then got a direct message from an account with 0 followers and following 0 people, saying I'm from the future. People go through with the raid and release creatures, information, and new weapons into the world. I didn't bother answering because he was probably just some guy trying to be funny. Then, I got a phone call right after I had seen the message from an unknown caller. A deep voice that was 100% a voice modifier started talking and said, "I'm not kidding. I'm a time traveler and I'm trying to warn everyone about this raid. Just listen to me." I was freaked out at this point because I had no clue how he got my number, but I was confused on if it was even the same guy. People just don't go marching in Area 51. They bring all sorts of weapons, guns, knives, baseball bats, you name it. They start attacking everyone at Area 51 and come out successful. They storm into the building and keep attacking everyone who stands in their way. I tried to say something, but he stopped me. "Don't talk. There's not enough time. Just listen." They start going through the entire base finding information like the government is rigged. Countries that have unknown resources underground that could be used for different things like weapons, buildings, or making humans evolve into a stronger species. He told me that information is released about planets that have life on them. He told me about weapons that shoot lasers like video games and how people start to use them against guards. He said there were even different testing rooms where plants, animals, and even humans were being tested on. Then they made it to where they kept any creatures that aren't supposed to be on Earth. He began saying the creatures they found and released were locked up and hidden for a reason. He said that all the creatures were on a certain level of danger. Level 1 was the lowest and level 3 was the highest. They started with the level 1 creatures, which were creatures like animals with 2 heads, or humans that were mutated and had wings or tails. Then they made it to level 2 creatures, which were creatures that looked like something from another planet. Scaly skin, claws, wings, and massive teeth. Some were still animals, but were bigger than they should have been, and had sharp teeth. When they finally made it to level 3, the creatures they found were almost like bats, and they were bigger and had no fur. These bat-like creatures had bones and ripped up military uniforms in their cell. Another creature was a skinny white one, with black eyes, and when one of the people raiding looked through the glass to see it, and was staring at it, he started chanting satanic stuff, and shot himself. At the end of all the creatures was a room with cameras and buttons to lock and unlock doors. There was one button that would unlock or lock all of them at once instead of one by one. One of the people raiding decided to press that button when no one else would, and he released all of them. He said doors started opening and all the creatures went wild and started to run and fly around Area 51. Some were attacking each other. The people raiding all ran through an emergency exit and found their way out of the base, where they were surrounded by more military waiting for them. They were gunned down, and when they tried to tell the military what happened, one of the walls was bursted through, and all the creatures escaped and ran different ways. The military tried to shoot them, but some creatures attacked. When they all attacked, the military's weapons weren't enough, and they were all wiped out by level 3 creatures, and the raiders were killed in the mess too. Days after the raid, cities began getting attacked by different creatures, and were all destroyed. The world became a playground for them. I'm warning you now, so let others know that people go through with the raid. He hung up the phone, and when I tried to call him back so I could ask him questions, the phone number wasn't even a working number. Please, do not go into Area 51 this September. Take it from someone who only just escaped by the skin of her teeth. I get it, I really do. People want to do something fun, see some aliens, or prove aliens don't exist, or whatever. I was just like you guys back when I was young. How the hell do you think I wound up there? I didn't want to post this. I wanted to just get on with the pathetic life I have painfully carved for myself out of the shreds of existence I have left. But the number of people who want to attend keeps going up, and the more I see, the more I feel like it's not just a meme to everyone. Like eventually September will come around, and some absolute idiots will actually go there. What nobody seems to realize is that this is not the first time we have visited Area 51. It is just the most modern in a long series of iterations of the same phenomenon. It will not be the last either. This isn't some fantastical time travel story, or brainwashing, or whatever, like I've seen doing the rounds. This is the honest-to-God truth. We have been to Area 51. Repeated floods of humans marching in, many willingly. It's just that most of us do not make it out. Hell, maybe I am the only one. I guess the best place to start is the beginning, way back in the 80s, when I can scarcely believe is nearing 4 decades ago. The fascination with space was reaching an interesting crescendo in popular culture. We had progressed from the realism of the space race and the true fantasies of science fiction to a sort of oddly hopeful medley. We'd made it to space, launched satellites, walked on the moon, and the concept of life out there had transformed from ridiculous concepts to a very real possibility in the scientific communities involved. It was an exciting time. My wife and I, we were absolute UFO fanatics. We both grew up in small towns in England, surrounded by neo-pagan hippies on one side, and conservative bigots on the other, and found solace in our mutual obsession with the future. How couldn't we? The future was a place where our pagan marriage might be valid in the eyes of the law, where we need not fear abuse and attacks, where women attending higher education was more than a novelty, where people saw beyond race and loved one another. For two lesbian pagan women in an interracial marriage, the future was a shining beacon of hope. Being 20-somethings, we also latched onto the more frivolous aspects of futurism: weird, shiny fashion, David Bowie, Doctor Who, rocket ship architecture, artificially constructed food, Star Trek. We soaked ourselves in all of it, especially the one big, exciting prospect: aliens. The idea of intelligent life beyond us was catnip to our fantasies. We consumed every form of media that addressed them, from pure fiction to conspiracy theories, from reported sightings to composites of supposed aliens. That was when we planned our transatlantic trip to the USA, to indulge in an alien hunting road trip. The US seemed to be a hotbed of alien sightings, space nerd tourist traps, and wide expanses where aliens may hide. So much more interesting than our quiet little villages in boring old England. America was the future. Of course, people didn't know about Area 51 being a military base at the time. If we did, we'd probably have been too chicken to go. We lived in the end of the Cold War, with oppressively militaristic, imperialistic people on our side of the family, and terrified war-protesting hippies on mine. We were scared of the Army, to be honest, and the US Army was even scarier than our own. Area 51 wasn't even some big key point on our journey. It was just one stop on a long series of alien hunting missions, spanning 7 months of freedom on the road. Things went off plan when we met Chuck at an alien conference along the way, and he told us about his plans to go out into the Nevada desert, where apparently some of his best sightings had been. We had been scared, of course, but not of him, or of Nevada. We were still a queer couple, my wife a bit too dark, our marriage and faith an affront to many of small villages we crossed through. We were cruising on our invisibility as a couple of gal pals, but the invisibility also made us vulnerable. So many alien hunters would go missing at random. We were thought they were kidnapped by serial killers and other criminals. Chuck thought they were lifted by aliens. Either way, we felt a bit safer in the company of this confident young man. Nevada had been one stop on our journey, and we sped it up a little to stay with Chuck. I can't help but wonder how wonderfully ignorant our lives would have been if we had not. We could not have just said no thanks, continued to follow our plans, finished our uneventful road trip, and returned to the UK. My wife might have finished her MSc. I might have started writing those novels I always wanted to. A glorious mundane life, lost to the one decision. Instead, we drove through the desert by day, staggering about during the cold nights, trying to spot a spaceship with a guy who was decidedly not in his right mind. We literally stumbled across the Area 51 base when following one of Chuck's endless maps of the deserts. He saw a light and thought it was a spacecraft. His face fell when he realized it was clearly a man-made construction, but that did not stop us. It looked secure, but we didn't recognize it as a military base. It just screamed top secret. To our excitable conspiracy theorist minds, we had to get in, to see if the government was hiding aliens in there. Experienced protesters and anti-authoritarians, we found it pretty easy to scale the simple fences. There did not seem to be a guard around. For a brief moment, we thought it was abandoned. Then, trying to clamber through a window, we saw an actual soldier and snapped back to reality. We ran, and we were caught. Of course we were. We were two skinny hippie pagan chicks, and a conspiracy nut who couldn't look more like a meth head if he had tried. We were clueless and weak and unarmed. We were thrown to the ground, slammed into the dirt, and held down by 2 soldiers apiece, where we waited for the superiors to come and have a look at us. I expected to be arrested, perhaps. Being thrown unceremoniously into a cage with my wife was part of what I had expected. When we were locked up, separated from Chuck, I felt vindicated. I felt lucky we had not been shot on sight. Briefly, little did I know what would happen later. Being shot might have been a better option. You know those photos supposedly of US surgeons, soldiers, and government officials inspecting alien corpses? The ones that get debunked all the time. that are too obvious and clear to be actually real. They're real. All of them. Those beings tied to tables, in cages, being dissected. They're all real. Every once in a while, one must leak, and then there is a big campaign. Someone gets paid off to say they faked it, and life moves on for everyone outside Area 51. I have seen enough of them to recognize what I am seeing there. I have seen enough conspiracy theories to know what people think of these images, and they're all wrong. The thing that people are missing is, the leaked pictures don't portray aliens, they portray us, humans, the prisoners at Area 51. No, not prisoners. We were not prisoners, or hostages, or criminals. We were test subjects, and our presence at Area 51 is not accidental. We were baited there. Like countless people before us and countless since, we didn't break in. We clambered inside a waiting trap and let it shut around us. We were locked up, dehumanized, stripped of our names and identities. We were forbidden from talking to one another. We would be electrocuted if we did. Our diets were a strict supply of sludge to wash down mysterious pills and powders. Once a week, we would be rolled into surgery and come out with a new scar. For the first few comparatively blissful years, my wife and I were in a cell together. I don't know why, but I did not question it. She was my only solace in the silence and pain. By night, I would curl up behind her and cry myself to sleep in her soft hair. During the days, she would lay her head in my lap and smile at me warmly. They took her away. We were moved to little solitary rooms, and I thought I could hear people pacing, weeping, sometimes crying out in the rooms beside mine. I had no idea where my wife's room was. I saw her from time to time. They wanted us to stay fairly healthy, so we sometimes ate communally and did daily gym drills, where we all saw each other. I could watch her out of the corner of my eye sometimes, in total silence, met her gaze across the room, and share a forced smile, somewhere deep down. We both believed we would make it. One day, she just stopped showing up. After a few days of naive patience, I stopped believing I would make it. Not without her. I didn't even want to. My wife absent, I turned to watching the other people during meals and exercise. They looked as broken, disheveled, and injured as I did. Their expressions were dead and emotionless. Like me, every week they showed more scars. But something else began to change shortly after my wife disappeared. Our pills. We had new ones. And I could feel something odd when falling asleep from then onward. If I could even sleep through the pain at all. With each passing day we became less obviously human. The differences were so slight, and yet with time I realized just how monstrous we had become. Fat wasted off our bodies, our muscles seemed to shrink and harden around our bones, our heads accumulated fluid, our skulls thickened. It was nearly imperceptible on a day-to-day basis, except for surgery day, when new scars appeared on our heads and chests, our skulls and ribs seeming to transform dramatically, as though our ribs were being shaved down and the spare bone were being shoved into our skulls. I doubt that was what the Area 51 doctors were doing, but it was how it felt. As time passed, I stopped looking human almost entirely. My head was a bulbous mass. My eyes and cranium expanded. My jaw and nose whittled and atrophied to almost nothing. My limbs were almost all bone, with only a few sinewy muscle strands visible, hard as steel cord. My skin was almost entirely bare. All over, I sported only a few random patches of peach fuzz and faint, brittle hair. My nails were gone. My teeth had been removed at some point. My skin, once pale from imprisonment, now took a blue-gray hue permanently. I was adorned with pockmarks and scars from head to toe. I could barely recognize myself in the mirror. I did not even mourn the beautiful body I had once possessed. I was so far gone, I couldn't even see the slightest hint of what had once been. My former self felt like a distant dream. As they continued testing on me, they began to photograph me. The less human I looked, the more tests they carried out, the more they needed to photograph me. Apparently, my monstrous form was the intended result. I was being documented. One day, I realized what they were doing to me, or at least what was happening to me, whether they intended it or not. I was strong. My brain was still fogged by the pills and hunger. I was still depressed and longing for death, sleeping my days away outside of meals, exercise, and surgery. But my body got stronger and stronger in the gym. Soon, I was lifting weights that I had never even believed a human could. Thousands of pounds of mass, pulling hundreds of thousands. It was incredible. I had grown to despise my body, and yet for a few brief hours every day, I was in awe of what this new, monstrous, sinewy beast could do. I looked forward to exercise so much that when one day I was led away from the gym and into surgery ward, I nearly obliterated a guard's entire head in struggling. I did not know what I was thinking. I guess I found some comfort in my routine and wanted to feel that comfort. So, I punched a guard. His jaw shattered, his eyeballs came out of the sockets, and his sinuses caved in. I was swiftly restrained by 10 men, 2 injections, a taser or 2, and a pile of chains, then slowly dragged, screaming like a beast down the ward. The guard was left, a dead lump with a pile of sludge for a head, on the floor behind us. They led me into a room. It hosted one of the other test subjects. I could only tell it had been male by its naked crotch. I could only tell it had even been human at one point by the fact it shared so many traits with me. It almost looked just like I now did. It was injected with something to make it aroused. I realized, drawn on me, I had a new purpose. Laying in the corner, sickened by shots, shocks, and the newfound knowledge of what they would do to me, I threw up. The guards ignored me and continued adjusting the man's restraints, whilst the doctor added an IV of the same fluid to drip into his arm steadily. I had been terrified they would have made us copulate, like farm animals right in front of them. In comparison, the way they simply extracted his fluids and injected them into me was merciful. I still felt violated beyond words, and yet my worst expectations had not been met. It was quickly over and done, and I was dragged back to my cell. I tried to pretend it had not happened at all, at least until the morning sickness and bloating began. From then onwards, gym was replaced with either insemination or ultrasounds. I was not permitted to exercise, and when I tried, I would be sedated via a dart through a little window to my cell. The last shreds of self-worth were gone. I had been broken from a human being into an incubator. Most days were spent asleep, or else in a disassociated haze, waiting for the next sleep. Over the course of what was probably 2 decades, I bore them countless small, half-formed egg sacs and humanoid fetuses. I do not know if any other breeding program was successful, or even if I was considered successful despite my regular terminations. All I know for sure is that I was never allowed to carry one to term. Every 2 to 20 weeks, I was taken into surgery and induced. After another few days of ultrasounds, I would be inseminated again. The things I produced never looked anything like a human being, just like they looked like me, like what I had been turned into. Repulsively half-formed, coated in blood, or in an amniotic sac so thick the surgeon could carry it like a plastic bag without it bursting, but still, like me. The years passed and numbness grew. I lost track of time, lost my thoughts. I can scarcely remember everything that took place, beyond what I have mentioned. It all feels like a void, like my memories have been scooped out and discarded from what I have mentioned. I am sure you understand that I do not want my other memories back. My escape was somewhat anticlimactic. They were going to dispose of me. Apparently, the soldiers transporting me did not know I could speak, much less understand them. I'm not sure if it was because of my silence, or because I just looked so alien by this point. But they were clearly uniformed. They lined me up and shot me. I was strong enough to survive the bullets, smart enough to lay low, and strong enough to break out of the incinerator before it reached a temperature that could harm me. I was lucky. I was blistered and sore and exhausted in the desert sun, but I knew all this pain was worthwhile if it meant surviving. All I had to do was escape before anyone noticed that my body was not a corpse in the outdoor incinerator. I could escape and be erased from their records at once. I could be free, if only I survived the pain. So once I was out of the dry dirt, I began to run. I'm not sure where I found the energy in me to run so long through the desert, but I made it. Nobody saw me. I did not die of dehydration, starvation, or exposure. I just kept running and running, carried by some force other than my own willpower, until I reached a city. I collapsed in the park under a tree until someone woke me up, gave me some water, and with a look of disgust on their face, told me to move along. A local convent took me in. They realized I was mostly human, albeit shattered. The bullet holes and burns on me made me look more like a victim of a horrific accident. I would rather they believed I was a human burn survivor with birth defects, so that is what I said I was. They nursed me back to health, brought me some clothes and wigs, promised me eternal salvation and protection. I said I was a victim of a cult and domestic violence, so they kept me as secret as they could. Nobody ever questioned my story. No doubt many of you would have told the world. I didn't want to go back and I didn't want to die. I know I'm disposable, and I will not put myself at risk again to save anyone. Sorry, but I have done my dues. I have suffered and lost enough already. Once I was stronger and healthier again, I joined the convent. What else could I do? A life covered by cloth, protected by the walls of the convent, free of judgment for my appearance, hidden forever from public scrutiny. It was the best I could hope for. It's not as though I could get my wife back. No doubt she was already in the incinerator by lunchtime on the day I first noticed her absence. I have nobody to return to, nothing more to do with my life. I hope to stay here until I die. I hope that there really is an afterlife. When I pass, I shall join my beautiful wife. Still, I want to feel as though I am doing something more than just surviving for its own sake. I want to warn people. Hopefully, this little message in a bottle, floating on the seas of the internet, will reach a few people. Maybe some of you will take it seriously. I do hope so. Thanks for watching, Wolfpack. If you want to submit your story, my email and subreddit will be in the description below. And also, if you're not subscribed, please do if you want. And don't forget to like and comment as well. Have beautiful nightmares. And I will see you next time.